Okay, welcome back everyone. This is our penultimate, one before last, of our series on Sefer Daniel. We've done a deep dive. We've gone through many different prophecies and dreams and cryptic messages that the rabbis, among them mostly Rashi, the Rambam, we're going to see a lot of Rambam this evening, and our main commentator we've worked on this summer being the Abarbanel, who has a lot to say on Sefer Daniel. We've really kind of followed the path of the Abarbanel. We're moving into the last parts of the prophecy of Daniel, and this evening's prophecy is probably the most important because this week and next week is actually part of one dream, one prophecy that he received, and we're going to start it tonight and we're going to finish it off next week, and that is going to end up with the resurrection of the dead, which we'll talk about next week, B'ezrat Hashem, which fits in very well in terms of the order. But tonight, we're going to look at what happens to Daniel when he had a prophecy in the third year of the reign of Cyrus. Cyrus, if you remember, was the son-in-law of Darius the Mede, that's Darius the First, who took over from Belshazzar, who was a Babylonian. So he said over the past few weeks, there was a shift in power from Bavel to Paras. Okay, so we're going to see that transition a little bit tonight, and the main theme is going to come in the dream that he has, the prophecy that he has, which is an extremely awesome one, probably the most intense one that he has, and the most frightening. It's literally going to knock him out. When we get there, we'll see why it has such a powerful impact on Daniel. And that's Cyrus. Cyrus was the first king of Persia that we see over here. And he was actually good to the Jewish people up to a certain point. He permitted them to start to rebuild this second Beit HaMikdash, and then he stopped it. For some reasons, he stopped that, and it's going to take another 21 years until we get to Darius the second, Dariavash the second. He's the Persian king, the son of Mordechai and Esther, according to our tradition, and he's going to permit them finally to rebuild the final temple. So the 21-year gap from this moment until the Purim story. So right now we are right in the thick of it. And he was depressed. Daniel, and everyone thinks that prophets will walk around like smiling and happy the whole time, and he really was depressed, and he had actually been fasting in some form or fashion for the 21 years. From this point, even a little bit earlier, up to Darius II, allowing the Jewish people to go back to the land of Israel. That's according to many opinions, as we're going to see. So this is where we are. I will mention as an aside, because it was mentioned to me, that, probably shouldn't mention this, but it was told to me in the synagogue. There's a very great rabbi who sits next to me in my synagogue. I'm the unofficial assistant rabbi in that synagogue as well. And he pointed out to me, out of the blue, he said this to me. He didn't know I was teaching a course on Daniel this entire summer. He said, you know that Donald Trump is a Gilgal of Cyrus. Now, I'd actually heard this from some other people, but he just came out with it out of the blue. He just knocked it out there, and I'm saying, well, it's a little unusual. I know certain comparisons have been made between them. He actually said he has certain nutzotzot of his neshama, certain sparks of his neshama, which is the same thing, because in Judaism, reincarnation doesn't mean the entire soul comes back like the Eastern religions see. In Judaism, a piece of a soul can come back and do a certain mission. Well, we're yet to see. We're yet to see. Okay, we'll have a look. What? Forget her. Okay, so that was the words of Rav Kook, actually, in Eretz Yisrael, a big Rav, Mekubal in Eretz Yisrael, said that. We'll leave that aside. That does not interest us. We are dealing with what we're dealing with. So he'd been mourning for a long time. And why was he mourning? Because the Jewish people were still in Galut. He expected them to go back. Cyrus said you can build it. Then he stopped building it. And we know that Teshuvah has the ability, as we're going to see a Rambam in Hilchot Teshuvah about Mashiach. Why is the Rambam talking about Mashiach in Hilchot Teshuvah, the laws of repentance? Because we know one of the ways we can speed up the delivery of the Geula is through Teshuvah. So it fits in very, very well. He's going to talk primarily, we're going to see, about Mashiach's arrival in the laws of kings, because Mashiach is going to be a king, as we know, so that makes sense. But the laws of Teshuvah makes as well. So we see Daniel does Teshuvah, and the whole idea that Teshuvah can speed up the delivery of Mashiach actually comes from him. It really starts with Daniel. So that's what he does. And he fasts. Now, this fast, according to one opinion, is described as being a fast of 3 weeks of days. Some people understand it to mean 21 years, right? 3 weeks of days is 3 times 7 years, because days refers to the Shemitah cycle, or the weeks rather, and the days of that, so they mean 21 years. That's what Rashi believes. For 21 years he mourned and he did teshuvah, but others say no. They actually say, and the Abarbanel says no, it literally means for 21 days, right? 3 weeks of days is literal. He fasted and mourned when this decree of Cyrus, which came up to allow them to come and return, and then he smashed it down. What's interesting, we're actually told when this happened. It's on the 24th day of the first month. 24th day of the first month. What is that? What's the first month? When the Torah says month number 1, what's it referring to always? Nisan. Nisan is the first month. When do we see the word Nisan first appear? Because it's not Hebrew, right? It's Babylonian. Nisan, Iyar, these are Babylonian names. We see them for the first time in the book of Esther, which has not happened yet. That's coming later on, right? Because we are now 3 kings before Achashverosh. So the whole Purim story hasn't occurred yet. We're at the beginning of the Persian exile under Cyrus. So he refers to it as the first month. So the 21 days lasted up to the 24th day of the first month that he fasted. Some say he fasted during the day, some say at nighttime, some say he ate minimal amount of food. But what does that mean? What happens in the first month of Nisan? Pesach, which is, according to this opinion, he fasted over Pesach. Is that weird? Yeah, because you have a mitzvah, right? To eat matzah and drink cups of wine. But do you know the more incredible thing? Later on, Esther, if you remember, is going to have to go and meet Achashverosh, right? And she's going to fast for 3 days. Those 3 days of fasting actually went over Pesach as well. So where does she learn that she was allowed to give up on a mitzvah d'oraita, on a beautiful Torah mitzvah of Pesach, of all the eating and celebrating? From Daniel, because he did it too. So before she went in to see Achashverosh, right, to tell him, hey, I'm Jewish, please save my people, and he could have turned around and said, you're dead, right, because I didn't invite you these 30 days, because there's a 30-day window he needed in order to go and see Achashverosh, because there were assassination attempts against him, right? He was a paranoid maniac. When we get to the Purim story, we'll see why. So that's what's happening over there. So on that 24th day, right, and he's been fasting and mourning all this time, and he's avoided Pesach that year, he goes to a river called the Chidekel. That's the name of the river. Now, why do we need to know where this revelation he's about to be visited by the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel is going to relay a message to him, and this message actually will be coming from Michael. But Michael is a much greater angel, if you remember we spoke about, and he's the angel of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Now, in a weird sense, he is greater because every nation has an angel that kind of controls it, we're going to see. Michael isn't seen as the greatest one, but he has the, it's going to sound strange, smallest job, because in the land of Israel, the Jewish people have a direct connection to Hashem, and they don't need an intermediary. So in some sense, he's the greatest angel, and according to against Gabriel, Michael is a greater malach, and he's actually really quoted. Gabriel is actually going to quote him and say, I have a message from Michael. But you should know that the Jewish people have more of a direct ability to connect to Hashem, and actually don't even need such an intermediary via Michael, as a side point. Why by the Chidekel? Why by this river, right? Because we said you're not allowed to receive prophecy outside of Israel. But there are exceptions. But when the exception happens, it's got to happen by water. A lot of big events happen next to water. A previous vision of his, if you remember, by the Ulai River, I think it's called, and this one too is by river, to say at least he's able to immerse and purify himself because he's not on Kadosh land. Right? You can only receive nevuah on the holy land of Israel. And he's getting it on land that's tameh, that's outside. So in order to get through that at least he's by water, because water always represents purity. Okay? Okay, so he sees this man approach him. Now, I must say that the commentators get freaked out by the description I'm going to give you in English. And there's a lot written on it, but the rabbis are going to say they kind of don't translate it. They say it is what it is, and we don't try to understand it because it's a very deep vision that Daniel gets. He said he saw his body was like Tarshish, his face was of lightning, his eyes were flaming torches, his arms and legs were the color of copper. The sound of his word was like thousands of people shouting at him. That's how he received the prophecy of Gabriel. That's how the book itself describes it. Okay? And he says, I was alone when I saw this vision. There were people with me, but they didn't see the vision. Who were those people who were with him? Who were his best buddies? Who was he with at that time? So the rabbis tell us that he was actually with other prophets of his day, who were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, according to one opinion. Others say it was Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi who were with him, who were the last prophets as well. Different opinions. This vision was so intense, and they were considered greater prophets than him in some way, that they left. So they're with him. This vision they start to hear it somehow, because when a prophecy comes, other prophets get it, and they just left. They're like, we're at it, we can't handle this. But he remains. He stays, and he receives this vision. It then goes through and gives a little bit of his feelings before he even hears anything. And what happens is, I don't know how to describe this, but he actually collapses and blacks out. It's such an intense vision. Every prophet, when they received the nevuah, as a side point, received it in a kind of like a dreamlike state or a sleeping state, and they weren't able to fully have control over their faculties when they received nevuah, except Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to receive a prophecy. He was up, he was awake, like at the burning bush. He's able to have a conversation like me and you have a conversation. He has to have a conversation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the moment. Panim el panim, the Torah tells us. Face to face, he spoke to God. But ever the prophet went through an intense experience, and it wasn't so clear what they were saying. And if it was clear what they saw, it wasn't so clear what the definition, what it was actually talking about. That's what the Rambam says in the laws of Yesodei Torah. When they receive prophecy, their limbs tremble, and their strength of their body weakens, and their personal thoughts become confused, says the Rambam, so that the mind can be concentrated to understand what exactly they're saying. And that's why he quotes this particular prophecy of Daniel that says, no strength remained in me. He literally blacks out, and he's totally immobilized. We mentioned before, the Mefarshim tell us that when you had a prophecy, you heard your own voice speaking to you, but much louder. And some say you saw your own face talking to you. So it came to you in your voice, and it appeared as your vision. That's how you experienced it. Okay? He falls down, he prostrates himself, and the angel has to come along and kind of like poke him in order to lift him up. Right? To get him back up to listen, because he can't receive it in like this kind of like fetal position that he's in. Okay? So the angel is Gabriel, and he starts to quote and say, I've got a message from Michael, the Prince of Israel. That's how he was described. The Sar of Eretz Yisrael, the heavenly prince. Okay? And this prophecy is the one we're going to talk about now, and we're going to finish off next week. Okay? There's a lot in it. I'm going to pick a couple of choice pieces. The biggest piece I'm going to choose to talk about this evening is Daniel warning us about false messiahs, of which we have had plenty. According to some Jewish historians I've read, more Jews have died from false messiahs than anything else in Jewish history, right? Which is an incredible statement to make, okay? We're going to see a lot of troubles, and he's going to forewarn, and the Rambam is going to quote verses from Daniel in this prophecy that he's going to get right now to tell people to be aware, to watch out, and that's where the Rambam actually should know, is one of the main people who talks about this stuff because he was dealing with the Jews in Yemen. And the Jews in Yemen had to deal with a lot of false messiahs. And so they would write to the Rambam. That's why the Yemenites to this day, they love the Rambam. Right? If you're Yemenite, the Rambam for you is because you don't follow Shulchan Aruch, you follow the Rambam. La halacha, right? So the Rambam for them is like, the greatest living. Right? You'll see, for example, you go to a Yemenite for Shabbat and they wash their hands for bread, they're talking away and they're yapping away, We used to fight, we try not to speak if you do, it's not such a big deal, but they'll just talk and they'll say to you, we can do this, you shouldn't. Okay? Because the Rambam says it's not hesach hadat, it's not an interruption between washing hands and eating challah, eating bread. There are many, many more examples where they follow the Rambam, la halacha, not the Shulchan Aruch, as the rest of the Sephardim among the Jewish people do. Okay? So the Rambam is going to defend the Jewish people, and he's going to write letters to them, and then he's going to write in the Mishnah Torah and say, this is how you know you found the real Messiah. And that's what we're going to do this evening. How to know you found the real Messiah. And just a cursory look of the Rambam's writings based upon the prophets, where did he get it from? The Nevi'im will prove to you that Mashiach has not come, although he's very, very close. Okay, fine. So he says, I have a vision. He says, I've got a vision. Acharit yamim ki od chazon liyamim. The vision you get now is going to describe to you what's going to happen at the end of days. And the angel took him and he saw he was scared. So the angel changed his vision. We don't know, from that earlier look that we spoke about, and he appeared like a man in order to calm Daniel down. Right? He felt bad for the guy. He's terrified. He came with him looking like lightning, and it was terrifying him. And he said, you know what? He took the form of a man for the rest of the vision in order to not frighten Daniel too much. He then says, what I'm going to tell you right now is b'katav emet, truth. What I'm about to tell you is truth. Well, isn't every nevuah truth? Isn't it always truthful? Why is he telling him, oh, by the way, this Navi is true? So, not every prophecy is true, meaning that a prophecy that doesn't include an oath, for example, the word emet, is revocable, meaning you can do teshuvah and get rid of it. For example, we know that Yonah, the prophet, right, we speak about on Yom Kippur, went to Tarshish, right? And he went to tell the people in Nineveh, eventually, that they were going to die. He said, who told you? I'm a prophet of God. I received this prophecy in Israel, and I schlepped out to modern-day Iraq to tell you you're all going to die because you're sinners. And they said, we're going to do teshuvah. He's like, it's not going to help. And they said, it's going to help. It's going to help. And they did teshuvah, and they didn't die. 1 minute. Isn't Jonah a false prophet? Chas v'chalila, heaven forbid, not at all. We know that Hashem will make a prophecy and then say, but you have the ability through teshuvah, tefillah, and ma'asim tovim to get rid of the gezerah, okay, to get rid of the decree. That's true if it's revocable. This prophecy is irrevocable. Some prophecies are set in stone and are not able to be reversed. What is that? So the prophecy basically is going to include the prophecy of Greece and Rome. And we know that we had to deal with Greece, and we have to deal with Rome, and all the challenges we've had to deal with them. Okay? And what makes this one irrevocable? The words, b'katav emet, said the commentators, that's what makes it the way it is. Okay? Gabriel says, the Persian exile that's just begun, I'm going to be with you during this exile. And the Persian exile, the whole Purim story wasn't that bad, right? I mean, most Jews did not die. It was tough, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't a mass slaughter. Haman's plan did not come to fruition. And when he died and the Amalekites came to attack us, we fought back and we killed hundreds and hundreds of them, if not thousands. We know at least 500 main members. So we came out pretty unscathed and we celebrated. Gabriel says, yeah, that's because I'm with you now. But I'm not going to be with you in the Greek exile and the Roman one. And they're going to be much, much harsher. By the way, why is he telling him this? Why doesn't he just let it happen? If it's b'ktav emet and it's irrevocable, why is he telling him this? I always wondered this. Why is Gabriel saying, and this is what's going to happen, and you're stuck with it? I'm not sure. But I'm going to answer the following way. That even if a decree is made and it's going to be bad, the length or the badness of that exile or that challenge of the decree is still able to be fudged a little bit. That's one intention. And now there is, when it happens to the Jewish people, they're like, you know what? We know it's going to happen. We understand. It's like you have to go to the doctor, and he describes to you every single shot and injection you're going to have. Why tell me? Just do it. Maybe it's less painful if you know it's happening for a good reason. You know it's able to, Korah Barzel, going to refine you like a gold refining furnace. It has the ability to refine you. So these words of Daniel passed down to the Persian Jews, right? And then to the Greek ones, then the Roman ones were like, oh, you know what? It's painful, but we knew it was going to happen, and maybe we'll do a little teshuvah to help lessen the pain of it, and we knew it was coming, and it's for the good, right? It's all min hashamayim. Everything's happening to us as min hashamayim. How do we know? Daniel told me. Okay? So that's important as well. Okay. So that's this particular one, and that is the idea of emet. So the first he says to him is there are going to be 3 more kings that are going to occur, and I'm going to be around for them, and that is Cyrus, Achashverosh, and Darius the Persian, the Persian who's going to allow them to go back. So he's like, don't worry, you will go back and build a second Beit HaMikdash. It's going to happen. And he was right. It did. 21 years after this point, they did. It was actually 18 years. 3 years were added before, sometimes say after. But 21 years later, they did go back and get to build the second Beit HaMikdash, and that was under Ezra the Sofer, and that's after 200 years the Greeks came, managed to push them off. That's the Hanukkah story. Then 200 years after that, we have the whole destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. He's being told all of this. Building of second Kings, second Beit HaMikdash, Greeks, Romans, destroy the Beit HaMikdash, and then the return of final. He's given all of that information in a lot of detail in this particular nevuah. It's a little cryptic. Why is it cryptic? Well, he wanted to leave it cryptic because not everything needs to be understood, and people have to experience it in their own way. He also says, if you remember a few chapters ago, I've left this here cryptically because I'm not allowed to reveal Mashiach's going to come, but also I want people to want to pray. If you know it's going to happen at a certain time, you're not going to pray for it. But if it's a little open-ended and it can happen any moment, then we're still able to pray and hope that it's not as bad and will happen quicker than we thought it would be. Okay? All right. So he starts to describe the Greek exile, which I don't want to get into because we did a lot on it, and he talks about it for some while. Then he gets to the Roman one. Now, we're going to stop at the Roman one because according to many opinions, we're still in it. Truthfully, if we are, we're at the tail end of it, right? And that's the Christian exile, right? Because the Christianity is now based, its epicenter is in Rome, Edom. It's also called Romi, so it's still there. Although we're going to see next week, God willing, how the Abarbanel is going to talk about how there's going to be wars between the Christians and the Muslims right to the end of days. But we're not there yet. Okay? Are you following the sequence of events over here? I'm throwing a lot of you, but stick with me, please. So he says, in those times, this is Daniel speaking, chapter 11, verse 14, many are going to rise up against the king of the south. There's going to be some king in the south. South of what? I could bring you 50 explanations from 50 rabbis where the south is. But let's just keep going. And sons of the lawless men of your people, Yamdu al melech ha-Negev, the Negev is the south, Uvenei paritze amcha yenasu lamid chazon v'nechshalu. Lawless men of your people will exalt themselves, establish a vision. So we know there's going to be a false prophet, because they're lawless, establishing a vision, but they're going to stumble. So what's that? That's when the Rambam takes place. And he says that this verse, this is the Rambam, is talking about the formation of Christianity that's going to occur during the Roman exile. It doesn't start with Rome, right? Rome begins, and then at some point we have Constantine comes along and takes on Christian values. Now, I'm going to quote the Rambam himself, and the Rambam, as were many other parts of Chazal, were censored by the church. So I have the original Rambam here, but there are earlier versions that have extra pieces that we don't really see too much in our version of the Rambam, but I have them here for you, and they're going to talk about Christianity and Islam, which the Christian censors, and probably Islamic ones too, took out. But I'm going to quote them for you today as well. And he says the following, and this is in the original version of Malachim, the book of Kings, chapter 11, verse 4. If you open a regular Rambam, it's not there. I'll read through the Rambam itself a little bit later today. We're going to read it. but it's not there. But this piece comes from that Rambam. It was taken out, but it was found later on. And he says, this prophecy is all about Christianity, about Yeshu the Nazarene. Now remember, the Rambam is writing, in the 11, 1200s over there after Rashi, and he's living in Islamic lands, okay? Who imagined himself to be the Messiah and was put to death by the court. Right? Put to death by the court. Not the Jewish court, I should mention to you. By the court, it says. It has already been prophesied by Daniel, so he quotes this verse that we just mentioned. The sons of lawless men of your people exalt themselves, are going to make a vision, they're going to stumble. For is there a greater stumbling block, says the Rambam, than this? All the prophets foretold that the Messiah will redeem the Jews. This is every Navi. Every Navi who talks about Mashiach says, Mashiach's going to come. He's going to redeem the Jewish people, help them, gather in the exiles, and support their observance of the Torah mitzvot. But this man, the Nazarene, as he refers to him as, the Notzri, right, the Christian, first Christian, Jesus, he caused Jews to be put to sword, to have their remnants scattered, put into Galut, kicked out, to be degraded. They changed the Torah and misled most of the world to serve a God other than Hashem. So he's like saying, he can't be the Messiah, because every prophet, right through Tanakh, all say the same things. The Jewish people are going to be better off. They're going to be at peace, living in Eretz Yisrael with the third and final Beit HaMikdash. That's what all the prophets say. You can't get rid of that. It's there in the Nevi'im. It's not in the Torah, but it's in the prophets themselves. And this man, he says, did the exact opposite. But the thought of the creator of the world are unfathomable to humans. We don't know why. We don't know why Hashem did it this way. This piece of Rambam was cut out and deleted. But we still have versions of it in a few places. Okay? By the way, some say that this piece, where this pasuk is found, where the Rambam double clicks and says this is about Jesus, he says it could well be that this piece is actually talking about the Greeks and the Hasmoneans, right? That time. But since it all started, he said actually Rome really came from Greece, meaning that everything we have from the Roman exile was actually, and there are rabbis like the Ibn Ezra who says that Greece and Rome, those two time periods actually do go together, and they're one galut. No one pretty much agrees, everyone agrees that Greece, Yavan is one of the galuts, the third one, and Edom or Romi is number 4. Okay, but there are those that put them together. Everyone agrees though they really follow one from another. Persia and Greece do not follow one from another. They do not. But those two actually do. Okay? Okay. Yeah.
Question that might not be this morning. Did a lot of people believe that he was Mashiach?
Very good. So the short answer is, when the Jesus cult began, there were Jews among them. There were Jews among them. There's no doubt about it. There were many pagans as well. It didn't really settle into the full religion that we know till about 50 years later. All right, that's after the Nicene Council. The whole thing got together and became what it is. Okay, he's not going to go into such detail, but he was alive at that time. So the Abarbanel meaning was really seeing this. So remember, Daniel gives the prophecy, and all the rabbis trying to figure out what the prophecy actually means. That's the Rambam, and the Abarbanel agrees. He's going with this derech that is precisely what happened. Okay, I'll also add one last piece, and then we're going to jump into the Rambam. Yeah, I have a lot more to tell you guys. I'm just warning you. Okay, yeah.
Who cut out that piece of the Rambam?
So we don't know which particular. We don't know which. They say the church. We don't know which particular pope sanctioned it, but we've had a lot of trouble over the years with it. But they say the church itself did. Now, false messiahs, I should mention to you, false messiahs aren't just non-Jewish people, right? There could be Jewish people too. There was one failed messiah by the name of Bar Kokhba, okay? And he's a very intriguing person. The Gemara speaks about him. Rabbi Akiva said in his, remember, there's a potential Mashiach in every generation. There has to be. Because Mashiach, we know from the prophets, can come at any moment, right? And he can just turn up and he's Mashiach. That means there has to be a potential person on deck. maybe more than one. We don't even know. But there has to be one potential Mashiach at any given moment because the Geula can come b'heref ayin in the blink of an eye. In the days of Rabbi Akiva, that's the end of the Second Temple period, right? Rabbi Akiva was there when the temple was destroyed. He actually saw the destruction. There was something called Bar Kochba, okay? Right, the son of a star. Star is one of the metaphors that's used to describe the Mashiach, okay? That's what it was called. Later on, they changed his name to something a bit more pejorative, Bar Koziba, like the Feld one. That's not such a nice title for him. Rabbi Akiva said he's a potential Mashiach. The Gemara says that he was tested by the rabbis of his day. You have to remember, whenever big challenges come to the Jewish people, and we go through major problems, we start to have this fervent desire for Mashiach. Okay? Now that's not a bad thing, and it could be one of the reasons that God brings the problems in the first place. Problem is with that is that false ones come along, like Shabtai Tzvi, one of the most famous ones in history. I don't want to speak about him tonight, but he was a mad, insane individual. Okay? Bar Kochba, we're not too sure. However, he was tested. The rabbis actually tested Bar Kochba to see, and the Gemara talks about it. And he was actually given a smell test. One of the tests that is given to figure out if a person really is Mashiach is actually a very unusual test whereby they give you, says Isaiah the prophet, what's called the following. I'm going to read through the prophecy of Isaiah, then I'm going to give you the explanation of the Gemara, and then I'm going to tell you how they tested it on Bar Kochba and how he failed it, and that made him not Mashiach. Are you with me? So anyone can turn up, as I've told you many, many times. There are tens of thousands of people today. Most of them contact me directly, tell me they're Mashiach. I'm like literally tens and tens of thousands of them out there. Right? I told you it's called Messianic Complex. Okay? Many of them are watching this video right now, and they're saying, yeah, that's me. So they're all wrong. They actually believe it. Okay, so let me see what the prophet says. This is the prophet Isaiah chapter 11, verse 3. Ve'ericho b'yirat Hashem. He's going to be, ve'ericho means animated, right? With the or yira of God. The lo lemara enav yishpat. He's not going to judge by what he sees. The lo lemishpat aznav yoched. He's not going to judge by what he hears. That's what the prophet says. He's going to be very animated, and he's going to have to figure, what's he judging? I'll tell you in a second. But whatever he's judging, he's not going to do by what he sees or hears. Well, what's he going to use? So the Gemara, right? Rabbah tells us the Gemara. Rabbah said, Vericho. He's going to use the sense of smell. There's a special prophecy that's unique to Mashiach, says the Gemara, based upon the words of Isaiah, chapter 11, verse 3, that this special form of prophecy is a smell test. It's a certain type of prophecy. And when a potential Mashiach came, the rabbis administered and will administer this test to see if he passes it. What is the nature of this test? I don't know. It's above my pay grade. But that's the test. So that's what he says, and he's going to test. So this is the test they did at Bar Kochba. And they tested him, and he failed. And then they said, you're not the Mashiach. And there was a big rebellion and a whole big war, and he ended up dying and being killed by the Romans for being a false Messiah. Right? There were many, many potential messiahs that the Romans, most we don't even know about, ended up slaughtering in their day, right? And crucifying them. Okay? Many of them. Okay. So that's Isaiah, and that's the Gemara as well. Now, the Rambam goes a little further and says, let me tell you then what the criteria to be Mashiach are. Okay? This is important. Now, where's the Rambam getting this from? He doesn't tell us, but we know because it's all in the prophets. And what the Rambam did was he scoured the prophets, the Nevi'im, and he made halacha out of it. Made it nice and simple, so we didn't have to go and try to figure out what they're saying. He's giving you his opinion, like he just did with this pasuk from Daniel. And he says, Im ya'amod melech, if a king stands, mibeit David, he's got to be a direct descendant of King David. Okay? Because remember, King David was the one who was able to get a transfer into his tribe of Yehudah from the tribe of Binyamin, that Shaul, the king before him, was king of. But Shaul did not do his mission. He didn't wipe out Amalek that he was able to do. Because of that, the prophet said, you're out, and it's being moved to David HaMelech. David, he's going to become king, and that's what Shmuel anointed David HaMelech. So any future king has to be Mibeit David, a direct descendant of King David. Ben achar ben achar ben achar ben. He's got to have a book, a Sefer Yichsin, a book of genealogy to prove that he is. I've mentioned before, I actually saw this guy at a Sheva Brachot a few weeks ago. There's an Argentinian Jew who, when I was a single guy 30 years ago, I used to go to him for dinner and I said, am I imagining right? I just saw him a few weeks ago at this Sheva Brachot. We're sitting at the same table, and I hadn't seen him in many, many years. I said, you have a book at home that has your genealogy. He goes, I still have that book. It escaped from the Holocaust and has my genealogy all the way back through the Maharal of Prague, back to King David. There's a tradition of Maharal comes from King David, right? And King David all the way back to the times of the Gemara, back to Adam HaRishon. And he has such a book. And such books were actually widely available. Many families had them, but during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, they got wiped out. Okay? I don't know if you're going to have to present this book, because who says the book is true? But there's going to be some kind of genetic testing, I think, that's going to be able to establish it. We're not there yet, but we're getting very, very close. Okay, he's going to prove that he's from Beit David. Hogeh Torah. He's got to know Torah. So when a false Messiah comes up to you, anyone says, I'm Mashiach, say to them, what's the first pasuk of the Torah? In Hebrew. If they don't give you that, they're out. All right, they're going to know Torah. V'osek b'mitzvah kedavid aviv. And they've got to do mitzvot. Right? If there's some secular person, right, they can't be Mashiach. Says the Rambam. It's impossible. They've got to do mitzvot. Kefi Torah bechtav u'shebal peh. The mitzvah from the Torah and the rabbinic mitzvot as well. Right? You can't just be following the Bible. You've got to know the mitzvah there as well. So that's the Rambam saying. And remember, the Rambam is spreading and disseminating this throughout the Jewish world for the Jews who are living in the Christian lands and the Jews who are living in the Islamic lands, like the Jews in Yemen. Okay? I'm going to tell you an amazing Rambam that was also cut out. It's going to blow your mind. Okay? Bit of a controversial Rambam, but it's a beautiful one. And he's going to be a person who persuades the people to follow the Torah. So he's not going to just sit there in his ivory tower. He's going to be out there. He's going to be teaching Torah and bringing Jews back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? That's what he's going to be doing. Returning us to Torah mitzvot. Number 5. We've done 4 already. V'ilachem melchamot Hashem. So the Rambam is going to fight the wars of God. What wars are these? Now, when I was a kid, I went to a very Haredi religious yeshiva, and they said these wars are spiritual wars. Right? Because the yeshiva I went to, most of the Rabbanim were pretty anti-Zionist, right? Although all the students were very Zionistic, and these are spiritual battles. Where did Rambam get this from? The prophets. If you read the prophets, which I didn't do when I was in high school, I barely studied Gemara, but studied Gemara. But when you study the prophets, these are actual physical wars. And they're taking place in the land of Israel. No doubt about it. And they include, what we've spoken about a few times, the war of Gog and Magog, which the prophets speak about, Yechezkel Navi and Zechariah Navi, in great detail. 3 prophecies, talking about 3 possible wars, War 1, War 2, and War 3, and the final one, all of them being part of Gog and Magog, and this final battle is going to take place in the land of Israel, around Jerusalem specifically. Who's involved in it? What are the other nations? That's up for debate. Many different opinions. The Abarbanel has his opinion, the Rambam has his opinion, everyone has their own opinions. It hasn't happened yet, so you can have those opinions. But these are physical wars. They are spiritual wars too, right? Because sometimes they attack us physically and spiritually. But these are physical wars. You can't deny it. It's in Tanakh. I'm very sorry. I guess they didn't want to talk about wars in Israel because it gets people too Zionistic. I don't know why they did that. It's a great shame. The wars are physical. A lady approached me 2 Shabbats ago on the way to Bet Knesset, and she says, Rabbi, is it possible the war of Gog and Magog was actually the Second World War? I said, it can't be, because the Second World War took place outside of Eretz Yisrael. But there is a tradition, and there is a tradition that the Stipler said, the Stipler Gaon said this. He said that since that war was so bad and so painful, that maybe the decree of Gog and Magog will be a little bit lessened because of it. That you can say. You say it's still going to be a war, but it won't be as bad as it meant to be because it went through so much hell in the Holocaust and the Shoah. But there's still going to have to be a Gog and Magog war, and we know that because it's happening right now, in case you missed it. Okay. If he does all these, you can say that he's Mashiach. Okay? There's other tests, but he's got to have these. Then he adds 3 more. Im asav etzlech, if he fights these wars and is successful, and he fights all of these nations who are attacking him around Eretz Yisrael, and he wins those wars, Ubana Mikdash Bimkomo, and he builds the temple in its place, as opposed to which place? Well, any place. He could build the temple in, I don't know, Haifa, build it in China, right? Build it in Manhattan, you know what I'm saying? And say, oh, that's the temple. And people would try to do that. No, it's got to be in its place, meaning the Makom HaMikdash, Har Habayit. If you were to try to do that right now, you would start World War 3, 4, 5, and 6. So it's not recommended. But it's going to have to be built there eventually. We're going to have a temple on Har Habayit, on the place of the second Beit HaMikdash and the first Beit HaMikdash, the place where Yaakov Avinu had a dream and saw the Sulam going up to Shemayim and said, this is Sharashim, this is the gateway to heaven. And that's where Avram brought his son Yitzchak for the Akedah, for the binding of Isaac. That's the mountain. It must happen there. Right now, we have Jews trying to get up there, and many great rabbanim say you're not allowed to go up there. So there's a lot of action that's happening over there. But he's going to have to build that in his place. The Kibbutz Nidche Yisrael, and he's going to have to gather together the Jewish people who are spread out. Hare ze Mashiach Bavadai, says the Rambam. That is Mashiach Bavadai. These words were not taken out of the Rambam in the Laws of Kings, chapter 11, halacha 4. They are still in there. The earlier piece was taken out. Okay? Great. So that's the Rambam, and that's his understanding of Daniel the prophet. Okay? He then talks a little about the church, Daniel the prophet, and he says the following words. I'm just taking out choice pieces, but this one's fascinating. I wasn't aware of this. V'yalchenad nashim ve'al kol elokah le'yovin. He says that, let me quote the exact verse. This is chapter 11, so you can look it up yourself, verse 37. And he will not give consideration to the God of Israel's ancestors, these false messiahs, and he's going to remove the desire for women, and he's not going to understand the God of Israel. What's that reference to? Comes along the Abarbanel and says that this prophecy of Daniel is actually talking about the Roman time when the Christians take over and it becomes Christendom in Rome, and they're going to have priests who show no regard for the desiring the chemda of women. The church adopted a policy of celibacy for its priests. According to the Abarbanel, that was predicted by Daniel the prophet, which is why we see that among the Christians. And he's saying that's not a good thing. That is not a good thing. That is not what God wants from them. So the next question we have is, and there's a lot to say on that alone, but I'm going to leave that aside, but that's the Abarbanel, comes on the Rambam, and he finds I can only describe as a compensating virtue for the advent of Christianity and Islam, by the way. Okay? So I'm going to read this Rambam. This Rambam was taken out, but there are older versions that we have that has it in. Okay? And these are his words in the Laws of Kings that were taken out. Okay? And here's a piece of it. All these matters of Yeshu, the Nazarene, and of the Ishmaelite, who's referring to Muhammad, who came after him, are only to pave the way for the Messianic king. Now that's a big statement. I'll say that again. According to the Rambam, the only reason that God allowed Christianity and Islam to flourish, and they did flourish, I mean, they became epic and mega, okay? He's like the only reason that God allowed it to happen. Daniel is referring to this when he talks about these great kings who are going to come from the north and south and fight and try to fight in Israel, is to lay the path of the Messianic king. Wow. Why? Why is that like feeding into our Messianic destiny? He says to prepare the world to serve Hashem together. That's what the Rambam says. The world has already been filled about the Messiah and about the Torah and about the mitzvot. Some say these commandments were true but have been rendered unnecessary in our times. And others say, so when the true Messiah comes, and succeeds, they will all repent and know their ancestors sold them sheker. And they're all going to disappear. So let me just give you what the Rambam is most likely saying over here. And this is a tough thing to swallow. He's saying that these two religions, although they cause us a lot of trouble, sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad. To this day, there's aspects of the Christian world who are very pro-Israel, more so than many Jews out there, right? The evangelicals, right, who have done more to support the Jewish people in the land of Israel financially as well than, sadly, a lot of Jews out there. A lot of Islam has been great to us. We had many, many good times in Islamic lands. And many, many bad times too, unfortunately, as we're seeing today as well. We're seeing a bit of both. There's good of Ishmael and there's bad Ishmael. There's good of the Esav and there's bad of Esav. He's like, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't allow things to happen randomly. There must be some good that allows them to come up. That is, they have an idea of God via their Jesus and their Muhammad. And so when Mashiach comes, they're like, we know about this whole Mashiach thing. It's familiar to us. That's why God allowed it to spread so much. It wasn't us, the Jewish people, spreading it. We couldn't, right? We've been out there being, and we're not allowed to. The Torah mitzvah for us. But they came along and they took our Torah and they translated it into our languages and they spread it. They did a better job of spreading the Bible than we ever did. Why would Hashem allow that to happen? So he's saying there is a positive. So that when the true Mashiach comes, they'll be like, now I got it. The Mashiach that we had was the wrong one, but this idea of Mashiach representing God being a king of Israel, I get it. Now I understand. And that's when all other religions are going to disappear, says the Rambam. And they're going to know that what they had learned up to this point was sheker, but at least they're in the zone. At least they are not Oved Avodah Zarah, right? At least they're in this world, and they will repent and know their ancestors that inherited a falsehood and the prophets and ancestors led them astray. This idea of teshuvah among the other nations is not so weird. We know, for example, that Yishmael, before he died, did teshuvah. He repented. Remember, he was kicked out, and then we see him later on burying his father, Avram Avinu. And the rabbis say, we learn from this. At the end of days, Achri Yamim, the Bnei Ishmael are going to do teshuvah, and they're going to return, and they're going to, I hope, bring us the land, give us the land, and give us Har Habayit to build the third and final temple. That's what we're hoping for. B'ezrat Hashem. Hard to see it happening, but that's what he says. Okay? And other commentators agree with that, and that's what Abarbanel says. Okay, finally, and we'll finish with this. He talks about at the end of days, like mamash end of days, so he's now at the end of this part of the prophecy when it comes to Ishmael. So next we're going to finish off with his resurrection of the dead thing. He's going to talk, I just want to wait one more piece of Rambam, which I promised you. I'm so sorry, Mechila, but it fits in very much what we're describing with Daniel. Okay? So the Rambam over here is talking about, in the Laws of Teshuvah, chapter 9, the whole idea of Mashiach in the first place. And why in the Laws of Teshuvah? Because Teshuvah will bring Mashiach. And he says, I'll do it in English. He says, for this reason, in Israel in particular, their prophets and the sages have yearned for Mashiach. Why do we yearn for Mashiach's arrival? So that we can rest from the oppression of the non-Jewish nations. What is the main reason for Mashiach to come? Says the Rambam. Not so that we can say, nah, we told you. Not so we can control the other nations, which they've tried to do using their Mashiach, so that we can live at peace in our land, safely, and not have to deal with wars and persecution and anti-Semitism anymore. Okay? And he says they will find rest, increase their knowledge, become very smart, B'ezrat Hashem. Knowledge and wisdom is going to fill the earth, as Isaiah says, chapter 11, verse 9. The earth will be full of knowledge of God. One man won't have to teach anyone else, because it's going to be so obvious that God exists. There'll be no more atheism at all. These changes, he says, as a Rambam, are going to come around because the king, Mashiach, who is going to arise from David's descendants, we said he has to be in Beit David, so he's fitting in very nicely with what he said before, will be a greater master of knowledge than Solomon and a great prophet, close to Karov LeMoshe Rabbeinu. Why does he say Karov LeMoshe Rabbeinu? Others disagree. The Abarbanel says he's going to be greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Rambam can't say that because part of his 13 principles of Emunah, of the Rambam, is that no one's greater than Moshe Rabbeinu, even Mashiach. Right? But most others do disagree with that, saying no, he's going to have a greater level of nevuah than Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, he says close to. Therefore, he's going to teach the entire nation and instruct them. And then he says, and this is going to be based upon our reading today, all the Gentile nations, not just the king of the Jews, the entire world, we said already, is going to feel close and see this as the Mashiach, as their Redeemer as well. All the Gentile nations will come to hear him, as Isaiah the prophet says, chapter 2, verse 2, and it shall come to pass in the last days, Achri Yamim, that the mountain of God's house, that's Har HaBayit, where the third and final temple is going to be, shall be established at the peak of the mountains, and all the nations are going to flow to it. Nachon yiyeh har Beit Hashem b'rosh harim. It's going to be at the top of all mountains, and the non-Jewish nations are going to come. So the Rambam is following this idea that goes back to the days of Daniel, that it's not just for us. All the nations are going to be impacted very greatly by this final messianic age. Okay? And then he says, and this we have a discussion with next week, he also says that the world is the Rambam. Not everyone agrees with the Rambam. The Kabbalists, like the Ramban, we'll see next week, disagrees. But the Rambam says that the world, when Mashiach comes, olam olech minhago, is going to carry on as is. The world you see now is the world you see when Mashiach comes. It's just going to be peace for everyone in the Jewish people. The Kabbalists disagree and say the entire world is going to be completely different. I'll tell you next week, B'ezrat Hashem, what that's based upon. One last piece. We do know that the land of Israel is going to be much larger when Mashiach comes. This is based upon the words given to Avraham Avinu. You don't have to go to the Zohar. Avraham Avinu was promised the land of 10 nations. But when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jewish people, and Yeshua took over to enact his words, there were only how many nations in the land of Israel? 7 Canaanite nations. What exactly was missing? Well, we have Edom is missing, and Moab and Ammon. Those were missing. The Cani, Kenizi, Kadmoni. Those 3 nations, their land, not those actual nations, those nations don't exist anymore, but the geographical, that's why the Persians today have no connection whatsoever to the Persians of antiquity, but the geographical, we talk about Paras, okay, when Ezekiel the prophet talks about Gog and Magog and Paras, he's talking about the people who occupy the geographical location. That's what he's referring to. Not that they have any relationship whatsoever, genealogically, right, or even spiritually. There's no connection whatsoever. We talk about Paras, the Ezekiel the prophet talking about the land of Paras, Iran today. So he says, and the Barbanel talks about this, the prophets say it's going to be much, much larger. It's going to go up to Damascus. And then he says too, Nahar Parat, the Euphrates River. Now, I looked up this week, the Euphrates River is a long river, right? It goes through Turkey, it goes up. It goes up into Syria, way above Damascus, right? It's way up there. I mean, if that becomes future Israel, well, I could probably get shot for saying this, okay, but we'll leave that aside, yeah? It's going to be humongous, because those are 3 lands that were promised to Avraham Avinu that he started. Now, why do we miss out on that? Because we did the sin of Chet Egel and the Meraglim. When we had those sins, the land that we were promised was diminished. But Avraham Avinu was promised it, and that was a Brit that it was given. What do you say about a Brit Emet? It must happen. It will happen. At the end of days, the land of Israel is going to be much larger, going up and sideways and downwards as well. And we're going to see that B'ezrat Hashem when Mashiach comes. So he mentions that of Edom, Moab, and Bnei Ammon. He makes a reference to the much larger size of Israel once Mashiach comes. B'ezrat Hashem. We are going to pick up our last class 8, which fits in very nicely because David HaMelech was the 8th son of Yishai, and that's going to be next week, B'ezrat Hashem, and we're going to see the last words of Daniel, and we're going to talk about the final war of Gog and Magog a little bit next week, and B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to talk about resurrection of the dead that he gets a reference to as well. Not much to say on that as a side point, because Isaiah the prophet is going to tell us that not much has been seen of that. Okay, the days of Mashiach, we have a lot written on. We're seeing in great detail, but not much on that at all. 2 minutes. Any questions on anything we discussed this evening? Yeah.
You said when Daniel was having that vision, the really strong one, that there were other people around
Yeah.
Did they ever have writing where they witnessed they were?
Yes, Malachi, yes, they did. In their own version they had. Malachi the prophet is going to talk about it. For example, he was one of the 3 people who was there. He's the final prophet of the Jewish people, and it's a short prophecy. And at the end of his prophecy, he talks about how Navi is going to come, and he's going to describe, and he's going to announce to the Jewish people. Isn't that amazing? I'm talking to you, a little flash came. I am Mashiach. I get these comments all day. I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding you. Yeah, 100%. So they swear, every prophet that we have in Tanakh must have something to say about Mashiach, or they wouldn't be included in Tanakh, right? They talk about other stuff too. There were many prophets. We had thousands of prophets, okay, at different levels, but they had nothing to say about Achri Yamim, so they were not canonized into scriptures. They were not put inside Tanakh, okay? We only have the ones that we have, because they had something to say, even a part of their prophecy, about Achrit Yamim. So they must do. So Malachi does. Zachariah is going to talk about Gog and Magog, actually, according to the 3rd battle of Gog and Magog. Yeah.
You were saying we didn't get all the lands because we did what?
Because we sinned of the Chet Egel, that the lands of the 10 nations were not given, only the 7 nations were given to us. We did the sin of the golden calf and the spice, so it was reduced. Are you asking your question or his question?
My question.
Good.
His question, yeah.
I don't want to hear his question.
I have a great question.
I bet you do. Yeah.
So what's going to happen to, what's it called? Thing on top of Har
Say what?
The mosque. Yeah, the mosque.
Gone. The Rambam says, all religions are gone. Going to disappear. They're going to be removed. And every single person is Sephardi woman is here. And every single person every human is going to worship the one true God of Israel. Even Judaism, as you know it today, is going to be very, very different. And they like to think everyone's going to walk around like, wearing strimals or something. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to be a very different reality. The knowledge of God is going to cover the earth, like we said, Isaiah the prophet says, like the waters cover the oceans. It's going to be completely different. They're all gone. Done. No more religions. They won't be necessary. Mashiach's here. The Rambam saying all those religions had a role to play in the build-up to Mashiach's arrival, to prepare those nations, the Christians, the Muslims, and others for the coming Mashiach. But that's it. Once Mashiach comes, they're not needed anymore.
Maybe we tell it from now.
Good? JC, we're good?
Yeah, we're good for now.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for coming. I'll see you, B'ezrat Hashem, next week for the final part.